Back in my day, there was this thing called the Rubik's Cube. It was a puzzle that you twisted and turned to get all the colors to one side and to make a beautiful pattern where all the colors aligned. And it seemed like no matter how you twisted or turned, it would just lead to utter frustration and seemed impossible to solve. It seemed like almost that you needed to be a magician and have a magic trick to do it. However, what you discovered was that there was a pattern, that there was a system into doing it. And once you learned that pattern and system, it would take you mere seconds to solve. And you would never have to use anything else to do it. It could be jumbled as much as possible, and still, if you use the system, you'll solve it. In writing, there's something similar called the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is a system that's designed to help you tell your story. Most stories, if not all, have a 3-act structure. It's the how you get to the 3-act structure that's the interesting part in writing, because not everybody does it the same. There are many methods that you can use to get to the 3-act structure, and that is what this show is about, as we take a look at how you develop your own 3-act structure that works for you.
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I write novels, comics, short stories. I've dabbled a little bit in screenplays, which are fun. I write through a bunch of different genres because I'm a hybrid. I do some of my own stuff. I do stuff for publishers. So the stuff I do on my own tends to be more toward the crime, thriller, mystery side of things. But I do sci-fi and horror and things like that for other publishers. So that's me.
Hello, everyone. I am Heidi Angell, and I have written 7 series in about as many genres. I have a total of 15 books and 4 courses. During the day, I am a marketing maven. In the evenings, I'm a wordsmith. And in my spare time, I'm an educator, Renaissance woman, and magic maker.
Hey, my name is Venessa Giunta. I write primarily novels, but I also occasionally write short stories. I write urban fantasy with horrific elements. I am also a freelance editor.
Hi, I'm Leslie Conzatti, a fantasy author, book blogger. I have written a fairy tale, at least one fairy tale retelling. It's going to be part of a series coming up called the Undersea Saga. And I've gotten short stories published in various anthologies.
It's very hard to become, to start as a planter. You either have a design you're going to be an outliner, or you have a design you're going to be a pantser, and it's kind of that old like Reese's commercial, right, where the guy walks with the chocolate bar and the other guy has the peanut butter, and they kind of walked into each other, and then Reese's was born. The peanut butter cups were born. So, which part of the peanut butter cup were you carrying to begin with?
Well, I like to say that I am a plotter, but my characters have other opinions.
Nice.
And so thanks to them, I end up pantsing quite a bit.
I come from the other direction. I used to be a dyed-in-the-wool pantser, but that took forever to get a book done. So I started playing with different ways of plotting and working out what works for me and what doesn't. And I still do that. I still pick up little things from people. I will probably pick up something from one of y'all and steal it for a while to see if it works for me.
As for me, I was writing for a while. I was just writing stories for the fun of it for a while before I even knew like anything about like story structure or anything. So I would kind of pants my way through a story and then like invariably get stuck and just like I'm in a corner and I kind of have other ideas, or I would run out of ideas and not know what to do with the story, not to know what to do with the characters. And when I learned about structure, I started just writing stuff down and writing down and making myself outlines, because I am also very much a scatterbrain and I forget. So I don't want to forget. So that's why I write it down.
I hate outlining. I mean, I hate And by outlining, I mean the way they taught it to us when we were all back in school. You know, this goes over here, and there's a line down. You know, I hate that. Just I can't do it. I can't go into that much detail because if I do that, when I go to start writing, I've lost a little interest because I feel like I've already written this story because I've done so much outline. So what I learned to do, and it's just one of those things that just came from trial and error. It's not anything I studied or anything, was going to like a bullet point method of plotting. I know I want these 10 things to happen in this story. Boom, 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 boom. And I take my characters and I go, okay, we're at the beginning. I need you to go to the first one of those. And I send the character in that direction and then see how they get me there.
See, that's exactly how I do it.
Yeah.
I have a nice little roadmap. And then all of a sudden, my characters are off in Kansas. And I'm like, okay, come on, we need to get back towards Montana. Let's go, guys. So, yeah. But I always know where the story begins. I always know where the story ends. And I have a couple of scenes I know that I want happen. And then my characters throw some other fun things in there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's I call them signposts. So we're it sounds like we're like right on the same. Yeah, because that way you're still focused on where you know you want your story to go, but you're allowing for those spontaneous things that come out of the character doing something that makes it, in most cases, more interesting than if just a straight A to B plot.
How often do you find yourself straying as far from the outline as you do? Do you stray very far from it, or are you always able to reach in and hone it back a bit?
Most of the time, it doesn't stray far. It'll stray a bit, or it'll make a twist or something. But I did do a short story once where I was in the final, act of the story, and I realized that the villain that I had planned to be the villain was not the villain. And it's like, oh, this works so much, and it came out of the two characters talking, and so, I like this twist better. I'll keep going. So I go back through the rest of the story and go, let me start planting clues. And to my surprise, the clues were already there. So subconsciously, I guess I was thinking of it. But
your characters already knew.
Exactly. It took me a while to figure out what they already knew. And it wasn't one of those out of nowhere twists. So the twist made a lot more sense to the story than just a straight, simple plot I had come up with.
So I will often start out with like a bullet point list. But then what I end up doing is I fill it in a lot. So I'll make like a general outline and, bullet points, and then I'll figure out what scenes I need. And then I'll make like a bullet point of the scenes I need. And then before I ever start writing the prose, I'll take each bullet point and I'll write just a short synopsis. And it's a note to myself. It's not like a synopsis you'd put together to give to an agent or whatever. It's like, okay, this needs to happen in this scene when this character does this other character does that thing, and don't forget to include these emotions. And it's like directions for me when I'm writing it. And then I try to do that for every scene. And then that way, when I sit down to write, I know exactly what I'm writing. And the thing, when I started doing this, the thing that I found is that I write super fast when I have this to guide me because I've already done all the work. When I have problems, it's because I haven't finished it. It's because I haven't done that. So if I'm doing that and I get toward the end and I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do at that point, I'll write and then we'll figure it out when I get there. That never works. I always end up getting stuck in that. So it also gives me a chance in doing that to figure out where the problems are. And I understand for a lot of people, this would be problematic because, like what Bobby said, he said, I feel like I've already told the story. But for me, the telling of the story is in the actual prose that I create, because there are lots of stories that are the same basic story, but if you read it by different authors, like Stephen King is going to write it in an entirely different way than like Nora Roberts, right? Or like Terry Pratchett. It's just going to be a different story.
So that's interesting because that's how I do my nonfiction books and my course creation.
Mm-hmm.
I use that same format.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Venessa. It's like I do my outline. I'll write that bullet list of like everything that I could come up with, and then I'll kind of develop a plot around that and kind of actually do my chapter divisions already, kind of a thing, just to see where those are going to be. And then, and it's as the characters are going through those motions, are going through those kind of checkpoints that I have, and like the conversations and the character development that's going on in the process is kind of where it's like, well, they said this, so now I have to write it in later on and have to make a reference back to that and stuff, and just kind of it just kind of goes in other directions. And so I'm just like, okay, now we're over here. Now we have to get back over here. Like, okay, how do I do this? Okay, that's
Venessa said something very astute early on, which is that, you know, she takes things from what she learns, things about certain how people do things, and uses them. And I think that's probably the advantage of planting that plotters and pantsers don't have, is, you know, they get to a comfort zone, or they figure out a formula, and they go with that all the way through their entire careers. You know, some of them make adjustments, and some of them make minor adjustments. But I find if you're an outliner, you usually stay an outliner. If you're a pantser, you usually stay a pantser. And if you switch drastically the other way. You don't ever.
Which we've kind of heard on this panel too.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what parts? Let's take each of those styles, and which parts have you stolen from that you really like, that makes your process better? So from the outliners, what would you say is the benefit that they gave you that you really like, that you use for your process?
So the bullet points were kind of already like, that was just, oh, that makes sense to me that I would do that. The part that I stole from somebody was the writing of the little synopsis of the scenes. And I stole that from guys who do the self-publishing podcast, because that's how they do it. They're three guys and they work together, and one of them will do the outline and they call them beats, the little synopsis. He'll do the outline and the beats, and the other one will actually write it. And so when I heard that, I thought, oh, that sounds kind of cool. So I tried it and it worked. And then, you know, so like there are things I've tried that don't work for me, but that one, like I flat out stole that from those guys.
It's actually an old screenplay technique.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's actually a lot of what I pull from mine, because I originally was going to college for screenwriting, and then life happened and screenwriting didn't. But for me, I think I'm a very organized thought person, and so having things easily organized and following a clear pattern really works well for me in organizing ideas and thoughts and everything. But it was a hindrance for my creative process. And so I actually scaled back on my creative side because, like I said, my characters have opinions and I need to let them express it because it's their story. It's not mine.
They all.
You know, so I let them have a little bit of leeway. I give them some creative license. I just know the key points. And I actually pulled the key points idea from storyboarding.
Yeah, because I always like to think too, I mean, with everything I try to do, I try to start with the character. And one of the tools, I taught a class once where someone was asking about this with how character and plot connect with each other. And what I suggested was take the one basic plot, make it just be a simple plot, drop three characters you know very well into that plot, and you will most likely end up with three very different stories. Because how the character interacts with that story will be unique to how that character acts. And so if you put someone in who is rash and impulsive, and they have to get on the other side of a door, they're going to just kick the door down and go through. Whereas if your character is a very thoughtful, you know, got to weigh all the options, they may realize that's probably a trap. Let me go through the window. So when I have my bullet points, I try to keep them fairly simple. You know, this happens. And then see how the character interacts with it. And most of the time it works. There have been a couple of times where I've had to refocus because something just didn't feel right. And that's usually a lot of it's, by ear. If it doesn't feel right to me, it won't feel right to the reader.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning to trust that judgment helps a lot.
And for me, being such a scatterbrain, I mean, just the act of writing something down, really just like that kinesthetic connection helps it stick and helps it stay and helps me keep track of things. Even as I'm writing the narrative, as I'm going through the prose, like sometimes I'll get to the end of a chapter and it's at a completely different spot in the outline than what I originally planned. So then I have to make a new plan for the next chapter. It's like, okay, so now they're here. So now this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. I have to write it all down again and stuff like that. But like the more I write it down, the more it's like it starts taking on a new shape according to the characters and where they're at in their development and how that's progressing.
It's also important too when I write, when these character moments happen. Mm-hmm. And so we get this discovery of it, something about the character. I also make it a point, I keep a little character bios at the very bottom of my document. I'm constantly updating those when I throw in oh my God, he's afraid of heights.
Yes.
Because that may come in handy later.
There's nothing worse than being that author who changed the main character's middle name halfway through the series and didn't know it.
I mean, it sounds like you guys use a lot of the pantsing tool for your characters and letting them kind of find their stride. And is it also a setting that helps you with the pantsing too?
I always have my setting very well researched, planned, and set up.
For the third draft of another project that I was working on for a while there, I was trying to figure out how to put it all together kind of the thing, because it felt like a very episodic story that I had a whole lot of fun parts to kind of put together and stuff like that. But it kind of felt like the characters were kind of just moving from thing to thing to thing, from event to event, from place to place kind of a thing. And then I found out about Dan Harmon's story circle, the whole hero's journey, and the cyclical nature of it, and the way the different parts built on each other. And it just made so much sense. Okay, so then I took the different parts, I took the different events of my story, different scenes, and then I plugged them in. It was like, okay, so this is going to go in phase 1. These two are what she needs to learn for phase 2, and these are kind of thing. And I saw how it fit. So that enabled me to be like, okay, so I need these scenes, but I don't need those scenes, kind of a thing. And so then figuring out what I need and what I didn't need, kind of keeping in the back of my head when I'm writing out my outlines, or so the novel that I've published is, or I'm going to republish, is Princess of Undersea. And so then I'm going to start working on the sequel in November. And I've got, it kind of has a tandem storyline going on. So I went through and I wrote down I literally drew a line across the middle of the paper and wrote one side storyline, and then the other storyline, just kind of what's happening side by side. And so then when I go to make the chapter divisions, I can have this part here and this part and this character storyline here. I can keep the storylines going where the individual storylines aren't missing a beat.
I'm actually still trying new things out. I'm for my next series, I am hoping to I'm going to give World Anvil a try. So I don't know if you guys use that. Have you guys heard of it?
I heard of it.
It's a website, and it was originally built for gamers, for dungeon masters, game masters, to create their worlds for their players. But they also have, it's also now geared toward authors, and you can keep track of all your story Bible stuff there. And I use Scrivener, but the problem with Scrivener is that you can't transfer stuff from project to project and keep it all current. So if you do a different project for each book, you have to copy and paste all your characters from the first book to the second. And then when you update it in the second book, that doesn't update it in the first book. So you have to keep track of it. So, and it's really cool. It's a whole bunch of relational databases. So you can do settings, you can do races, You can do religion. And they've just started a timeline feature, so you can create timelines. And it's really cool. It's very involved. I mean, it doesn't have to be like Scrivener. It has lots of pieces, but you use what you use. So anyway, so I'm playing with that.
Can you do the physical writing in this aspect, or is this just like a database?
They actually just launched a beta section for actually writing your novel if you want to. But I'll continue to use Scrivener because I can export my information from World Anvil and import it into a Scrivener project. It won't continuously update, but I have a place where it continuously updates. So when I start my next project, I can just, make changes, upload the new version or whatever.
Yeah, most of mine is character bits. Now, sometimes I've had character things happen that cause major changes, like the Snow books, it's a series of novellas and they're standalone, but there's a big plot that runs through all of them. And so I had this plan for a series 1 to go 6 books. And I kind of knew what was going to happen in book 6. And then the characters go and do something in book 3 that totally wiped out my plan for books 4, 5, and 6.
Oh no!
But the story became more interesting, and it also made a character who was a minor character in book 1 suddenly became a very important character going through the rest of the series. So I was like, okay, so I refocus, replan my plots. I go into book 4. Something happens in book 4 that undoes my new plans. And so I'm just like, you guys tell me what you want to do. We'll go there.
How do you guys edit? Is it edit? Are you editors as you go, or you get your process done and then you go into the editing?
Editing is very analytical. It's analytical thinking. And what I discovered over time, it took me a long time to realize that this was the problem, but what I discovered is that when I am in editing mode, it's much harder for me to shift back to creative mode. So for me, it's more efficient if I do creative stuff first and then do analytical stuff. So what I've ended up doing is I might go through and add stuff. Like if I change something in chapter 5 that if I do something in chapter 5 that affects what I did in chapter 1, 2, whatever, I will go back to that chapter, those scenes or whatever. And in Scrivener, you've got like a little notepad that kind of sits to the side of your document, your individual document. And I'll just go in there and I'll be like, don't forget to change X, Y, and Z because ABC. And then I'll go back to what I'm writing and I'll go on.
I actually, just like with plotting, I kind of do a little bit of both. I don't do hardcore research for extraneous things, but I always go back and I'll reread the last chapter or so that I wrote to get my creative juices flowing again and get the story flowing again. And while I do that, I can't help but edit and change things a little bit. But then once I'm done, none of that's like hardcore editing. But once I'm done with the whole story, then I'll go back through and I'll read it and look for plot issues. And if I happen to see some grammar things, I'll fix those too, but I'm mostly focused on plot issues. And then I'll go back through and I'll read it and I'll focus on sentence structure and flow and things like that. And then usually during a copy edit, as I'm doing layout, I will edit it again. And then I'll send it to an editor and have them look at everything in the layout. So mine goes through a lot.
I tend to want to just get the story out as much as possible, as completely as possible, get to the end, and then go back and figure out, okay, so do I have all the references in there, kind of a thing, unless I'm arriving at a point where I actually I'm changing the outline, kind of a thing, because then if I decide that I don't need this, and this reference, then any foreshadowing that I had put in the beginning is now obsolete because I no longer have that part. So then I have to go back and I have to find those references and take those out, kind of a thing. And so it's in that way I do just a little bit of editing. as I'm going along. But most of the time, it's just like, I'm writing it going, I know this is way too many words. I know I could probably do this shorter, but I'm just getting it all out while it's still in my brain and just getting it out of the paper. And then I can go back and fix it later.
And you know how, like, when you have a conversation with someone and then you've had this conversation, you go home, it's 3 hours later, and you go, damn it, I wish I had said. Well, that's what happens to me at night after I've written, especially usually when I'm in bed. It's like, oh, man, and so when I start the next day, I kind of like what Heidi said, I go back and read what I wrote the day before. But those new little bits are still in my head, so I'll go ahead and jot them down. It's not really editing so much as just adding a little. And then, but yeah, I try to save editing until I'm done, because I'm more likely to do something in chapter 12 that makes me have to go back and tweak something in chapter 4. Yep. So there's no sense editing it because I might change it already anyway. So, but I do get those things where the characters will talk to me later and says, man, I should have said this instead. And that, yeah, so.
But then you get to go back, you think, I can fix that.
I can fix that, yes.
That's so, I was just going to say, it's amazing you can do that, because, like, if I do that, if I'm laying in bed and I've written something and I think of something that I should have said in that, I will get up and go and write that down, because I can't, because if I don't, I'll look at what I wrote.
I have learned to write on this.
Yeah.
You don't even have to write, you could just record it.
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, I was finding, for my second book, I was finding a lot of what I was discovering was when I went to the gym, and I would be, I always sit in my car for a little bit to decompress, and all of a sudden ideas just started flowing through my head. So I picked up my phone and I dictated to it. So half of my book is in my phone. So,
taking a drive, mowing the lawn does it for me, because you're
doing menial household chores.
You're not using because you're not using that creative part, and so you can solve problems you didn't realize you had that way. So,
man, does that mean I have to start cleaning my house?
I actually had a client that I was doing an email sequencing for, and I got stuck on this part. It was like, okay, well, this is what I want to say, but I don't like the way it's said. And it literally took me 3 days of doing this menial task and doing that, and it kept coming to my head. And then I ended up coming up with 4 really great ideas, and now I have to go A/B test it. And I wish you could A/B test stuff for books.
What I've discovered in doing these conversations is that within the 3-act structure, a certain act is given a certain discipline problems, and for outliners, it seemed to be the middle, the second act. For panthers, it seemed to be the first act. It seems like the third act might be the natural problem, because it's not so much that you can't write it or know it, but that connecting the dots kind of aspect of it.
Actually, for me, the ending is the easiest, because it's what I started knowing from my plotting piece anyway. Often my characters, hurting them to the climax is often my struggle.
I think that's really common for when you're pantsing too, is that you don't know enough about your story yet at the beginning, to get the beginning right. And I think that's even common for everybody. You do a much better job on the beginning when you finish the end.
Now, when I start writing, when I start, that usually flows out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But like you just said, sometimes I'll get to the end and I'm near done, and I'll go, man, that opening needs some help. And so a lot of times I'll write something new for the opening.
Yes.
So that happens.
When you first get the idea, it's usually somewhere in the middle. It's either the inciting moment or the big climax, and you're just like, oh, this is cool. I want to write a story and I want to put that in it. And then like, but how did they get there?
Yeah.
And what are they going to do next?
I mean, you get those points where, it's up there, but it's, what you need to do, but you just can't get over that one hurdle.
Yeah. Or you're not even sure what you need to do, but then once you figure it out, it's like, oh, thank God. You're just like off to the races. I'm still waiting for that point right now.
That's why I work on multiple things at one time.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm getting ready to do right now. I'm doing revisions on something for a publisher that I promised earlier in the year, but 2020, so that didn't happen.
2020.
Because 2020, that's all I got. That's all I got.